Procession will be next Sunday after the 11 a.m. Mass. We'll meet at the Sundial Circle Plaza in downtown Carefree, where Father Jess will lead us in prayer and song as we process around the circle. All are welcome to participate, and there will be a box lunch. If you plan on attending, if you could contact the parish office before Friday to order your lunch. The first cash and check collection for our parish Advent project will be next weekend in the courtyard after all Masses. These funds will be used to buy Christmas gifts for students at two underserved schools, St. Agnes Catholic School in downtown Phoenix, as well as St. Charles Mission School on the Apache Reservation. For many of these students, this will be the only Christmas gift that they receive. Lastly, during Mass, we're going to have a short movie called The Veil Removed. It's about 5 minutes, and it's really awesome, and it will play well into the teaching Mass that we have today. So as we do at all of our Masses, we'll stand up and welcome each other, and then then Father Kurt will jump into the program.
Hello? Wonderful. Just as Deacon had you stand up, I'm now going to ask you to sit down. So, thank you all for being here this afternoon, early evening. Deacon and the servers, you might want to sit down too. So this is the teaching Mass, and maybe some of you are aware of the teaching Mass and you're here because of it. Or maybe some of you just walked in and you're like, I'm here to attend Mass. What is this teaching Mass? And if you weren't forewarned beforehand, it's going to go a little bit over our hour today. So that's maybe the bad news for you. But the good news is I don't think there's another Mass nearby. So even if you were to go there, you might as well just stay here because it'd go way longer. But the teaching Mass, if you haven't been to one before, is an opportunity for me to explain as a priest the different parts of the Mass. Because I think oftentimes as Catholics, we go through the motions, right? We're often accused of going through the motions without really sometimes knowing what we're doing. And there's really great meaning and significance, practical and spiritual, of everything that we do. The purpose of the Mass at its very core is the meeting of earth and heaven together. If we could only see with our eyes what is taking place, we would literally die, not out of fear, but out of joy. And the very fact that heaven is being ripped open and earth is coming down and the two are coming together on this plane, and God and man are united. It's also a pilgrimage. When we have processions, when we come in from the beginning of the Mass and different parts of the Mass, it's a pilgrimage from earth into heaven, from time into eternity. And so often, we think, wow, this is amazing. Like the fact that God comes down, if any of you have any loved ones that have passed on, this is the part in our earthly time, in our earthly history, where we are directly united with them. That you think all of these pews, there's empty spaces here. No, it's not. It's filled with the angels, it's filled with the saints, it's filled with the souls in purgatory. It's filled with all of our loved ones who are enjoying the beatific vision with us right now. And so if I ever miss my grandfather who just recently passed away, if I ever miss my great-grandmother who passed away also this year, I know that the place where I will be united with them before I'm eventually united with them in heaven, God willing, that I become a saint, was right here. And so the other deeper message and the purpose of the Mass is by way of analogy. So I always kind of tell this story about the teaching Mass if you've been to one before. But there was a mother in Sydney, Australia, Kate Org, who made the news when a couple of years ago she had given birth to a set of twins. And Emily and Jamie. Jamie was the son, Emily was the daughter. And unfortunately, when she gave birth to them, Jamie was born stillborn, whereas Emily was alive. And so as they took away Emily and they left Jamie in the arms of his mother and father, Kate, the mother, pressed her son close to her heart, skin to skin. And she kept on reassuring Jamie and said, you know, I love you. I will always love you. You will never be forgotten. And I will make sure that Emily, your sister, will know about you, no matter where we go. And at that point, after the first 2 minutes or so, Jamie started to kind of like heave a little bit in his chest, and his eyes started to flutter. And then she called the nurse and the doctors right away and said, hey, I think my baby's alive. And then the nurses and doctors didn't want to get her hopes up and said, you know, this is sometimes a common reaction of when a baby dies. It may move or twitch a little bit, but it doesn't mean that it's alive. And yet she never gave up hope. She still kept on holding the child and said, I love you, I care about you, your father and I love you. And 2 hours later, the breathing started to become regular, and the baby opened up his eyes, and Jamie was alive. And the headlines in the newspaper in Australia said, mother's voice and touch brings child back to life. And the reason why I tell this is because the Mass is not only the part where heaven and earth are open and we come to unite with God, but it's also an opportunity where we get to press our face close to the heart of Jesus, where we are wrapped in the arms of our loving Father who reassures us and tells us, I love you, I care about you, I will never forget you. And even if you are dead in sin, even if you think you are so far away from your Father's love, you are never too far for me to forget you. And it's that voice, it's that pressing to the heart of the Father at Mass that brings us back to life. That where we get to hear God's reassuring voice, where we get to physically press and touch his heart in the Eucharist, so that we can not only just survive, but thrive. And so, oftentimes, as I explain this for the Mass, and even sometimes when I talk to my students at Notre Dame Prep, the reaction isn't almost like, oh my gosh. It's more like, oh, not Mass again. Like I'm bored, or I never get anything out of it. And the thing is, I don't like the fact of never get anything out of it, because the thing about it is that you've probably heard the saying, you only get out what you put into it. And sometimes we use it for Mass. We say, hey, you need to put something in order to get something out of the Mass. But I don't even like that analogy for the Mass, because the thing is, it's often like a transaction. We think of like the Mass as like, you know what, if I put this into it, then I'm supposed to get something out of it. Instead, I like to think of it in this way. What do you normally get out of spending time with the one that you love? Now, if some of you have young teenagers or so forth, and they're hanging out with their friends, or maybe the girl that they like or the boy that they like, you come back home and they come back home and you ask them, hey, what'd you do? And then they're like, nothing. And then they're like, well, where were you for like the past, just hanging out. And so they'll be like, well, what did you do? Nothing. It's like, okay. But the thing is, you know that's not the case. When they're spending time with each other, even if you don't do anything, because it's a person you intimately know and you love, it will always be a time not of waste, but of gain. And that's what the Mass is. To the world, you coming in and sitting in the pews, standing, kneeling, getting up and whatnot may seem like it's nothing. What did you do when you got out of it? But if we see it through the eyes of spending time with the one who loves us, then everything changes. And the thing about it is that we never spend time with usually somebody that we don't know. We usually spend it with somebody that we do know, and that changes everything. And that's why this Mass is so significant, because the more that we know stuff, the better we're able to appreciate it. And so even from the very things that I wear, everything that I do as a priest, there's a change and there's a symbolism, practical and spiritual. So even for the clothes that I normally wear as a priest, right? It's all black. And I know, like many people may say, Father, your drip is on point right now. And, it's not only just practically like stylish and black, and I don't have to worry about it, but it also has the spiritual significance of symbolizing who I am and what I'm called to be. So black generally means, in the world, like when you see something dark, and like, it means like death, right? So death, and it means death in a different way. So you're like, oh, Father, are you a goth or something? No, that's not the case. What it is that, but what I'm wearing as Black Death, it means that, first of all, on a global level, there is death in the world, there's sadness, there's sin. But also for myself, as me wearing this, I am called to die to myself, because I don't live for me. I'm supposed to, as we all are, called to live for each other and for God. And so I'm supposed to die to those things that I don't really want to do and start to put on Christ. So black represents the death, but even in the midst of that, notice there's something white right here, right? White represents Christ. It's on my neck because it directs my head and my viewpoint. So hope, Jesus, love, everything that white symbolizes here is supposed to direct my outlook and my hope even in the midst of a dark world. Because as Christians, as Catholics, if you guys are morbid and if you guys are like not hopeful and you're mean and angry, nobody's going to want to fill these churches, right? Because our God is a God ultimately of life and of hope. And so that's what we're called to represent. So as we're going from the earthly life into eternity, it's that happens. So this is called a anise, and it's usually a piece of white cloth here. But there's a cross here, and when the priest puts it, it's with two strings. He kisses it, and then he touches it to the forehead, and then he wraps it around his neck, as he says, "Place upon me, O Lord, the helmet of salvation, that I may overcome the assaults of the devil." So the thing about it is, if you notice what I'm doing is I'm preparing for Mass. It's kind of very militaristic. It's kind of like spiritual warfare of what I'm doing. I'm putting on a helmet. I'm putting on armor as I'm about to engage in this beautiful mystery of God. And why is that? It's because as I'm doing this, if I'm encountering God, if God is going to come down on this altar, who is going to be the one that's going to try to take us away from this? The adversary, the devil, right? And he's going to want to say, okay, let me try to distract you. Let me try to bring all these things. And naturally, some distractions may come into our mind. But when we give into this, he has won the victory, because he knows that when we come up here, just as my outward appearances are changing from black into, later on you'll see, there should be a change in our heart every time we encounter Mass. We shouldn't come here, just sit under our pews and be passive, and then come out the same people that we have. Because if that's the thing, then this is a failure. Because we are encountering our living God. So the next part of it is called an alb. And alb comes from the Latin word albus, which means white. And that's probably why Albus Dumbledore in Harry Potter was named so, because of his white beard. And as I put this on, the prayer that I say is, "Purify me, O Lord, and cleanse my heart, that being made white in the blood of the Lamb, I may come to eternal joy." And so this represents, for me and also for those servers and the deacon, our call to baptism, that we are being purified, that we have been washed, and we have a white garment. So notice when I come in and I stand in the world, it's black, but now as I come into the mystery of God, more and more it's all gone to reflect the heavenly glory, right? And so this also as an alb is something that the Jewish priests used to wear before. And when they were engaged in battle, they used to wear these long robes. And so as part of that, we also have a Jewish heritage. So the fact of the sacrifice of the Mass, what's taking place, the altar, comes and has parallels with the Jewish offering of sacrifice. Now the next part of it is, this is called a cincture. And the prayer that's made when I put this on is, "Gird me, O Lord, with the girdle of purity, and extinguish in me all evil desires, that the virtue of chastity may abide in me." people get this confused between celibacy. Celibacy means not having a physical wife and kids and things like that. But celibacy is a proper ordering of our sexual desire. And that's for all of us, whether you're married, whether you're single, whether you're a priest, whether you're a religious. All of us are called to a life of chastity. And so as I put this on, I'll loop it like this. When they used to wear long robes, oftentimes the priests used to be engaged in battle as well. They would enter with their army and they would engage in battle. And as you can tell, probably wearing long robes was not very conducive to fighting because, especially for me, I'm not a very, I'm a pretty clumsy kind of guy. And so I might trip over and so forth. So the cincture was meant so that the extra cloth that was on the robe will be gathered underneath their legs like this, and then strapped across there, and the cincture would be tied so that their feet could be easily moved. Now, that was the practical aspect, but the spiritual aspect, too, of chastity is oftentimes people will look at the church's moral laws on sexuality and things like that and say, that's a restriction. That's not for, my rights. You're taking away my rights. I should have to be able to do whatever I want to do. Love is love, right? But at the same time, what they don't realize is that people who often kind of give into all these things, they don't end up becoming more free. They become enslaved. They become enslaved to their passions. And so just in the same way that the Lord desires us to move into the world, we are called to live the life of chastity so that it doesn't end up restricting us, but ends up making us be able to move more freely into the world and do what we're called to do. Now, the next part is the stole. And so the beauty about the teaching Mass is I'm able to use some of the traditions of our church that you might not regularly see. So if you notice, the altar is kind of set up differently today, and there's a chalice veil, which I'll explain later. But it allows us not to say that these things have been gone from our church, but they're not as widely practiced. But in order for educational purposes, today I'm going to bring it back and kind of show you the history of why we do things. So this is a different type of vestment that a priest normally wears. If you'll notice, it's a little bit more ornate, and it looks different than the chasuble. But this is a fiddleback type of chasuble. And this is something called a stole. And usually on the top of the stole is a cross where we kiss. And the priest puts it around his neck. Now, the thing about the stole is that the stole is something that signifies the authority of Christ. So if you notice, anytime a priest is doing the sacraments, whenever he's at Mass, whenever he's forgiving sins and confession, he always puts on the stole because it's not him that's doing it. It's Jesus Christ himself. And even for rituals such as exorcism, okay, this is usually when the kids' ears perk up, like, whoa, exorcism, what's that, right? But I've heard descriptions of exorcists that they say that the moment they walk into the room to start to perform the ritual, the moment that they kiss the stole and put it on is a moment when the person who's possessed goes nuts because the devil in them knows that no longer is it a human being in that room, but it's Jesus Christ and his authority himself by which the ritual is being performed. So it's a very, very powerful act. And so normally the stole would lay across the shoulders like this. But since I'm wearing a chasuble and the way it goes over, I will be wearing it like this. It's a cross fashion with the right over the left, symbolizing God's authority over evil. That's why the right goes over. But if the priest wears it cross, because my authority as a priest is bounded or crossed by the authority of the bishop. So if the bishop were to come in tomorrow and say, Father Kurt, you are no longer able to exercise the authority in this place anymore as a priest, I would be stripped even though I have ordination. And they've done that before because sometimes when exorcisms happen and the priest is supposed to get authority from the bishop and he either forgets or forgets to ask, he walks in and he tries to perform it. The person possessed starts laughing and saying, you have no authority here because it hasn't been given to you by your bishop. So before, this is the symbolism of like the priest's powers are bounded by the authority of the bishop. And before in the history, the bishop only used to wear the stole downwards because they have full reign. They have the ultimate authority of the apostles. Then the next part is, this is just like practical significance. I just need it to be heard. It's the mic. But it's oftentimes the bane of priest existence because like sound systems aren't really that good in churches sometimes. And so this is that. And the next part is, this is called a fiddleback. And if you notice, oops, just falling apart right here. So if you notice, it's slightly different than what a priest normally wears. And this actually comes from the Roman tradition of where they used to wear long flowing robes like the Gothic chasuble. But then afterwards, they started to cut it down and have less and less material. Because if you think about it, the priests were celebrating Mass in Rome, and Rome during the summer is pretty hot. And so there's a practical application of it just being too hot. So, but at the same time, this sort of chasuble, which is called a fiddleback, was representative of the time of the Jewish priests, where they had, in the Old Testament, the Talmud, which was like a breastplate or a shield. Because this used to be made out of like complete metal, and then it used to have open sleeves so that the priest would be able to have his sword ready as he is about to engage in battle after offering the sacrifice, or using the sword to slaughter the animals in which it was being offered. So as you can see, each of these has a purpose and a meaning. And the prayer of this, as I put on the chasuble, is, O Lord, who said, my yoke is easy and my burden light. Grant that I may bear it well and follow you after with thanksgiving. Amen. Don't worry, I'm almost starting Mass. But I just want to go over a few things. If you notice, as I said, the altar is set up differently. The priest will be facing today, myself, will be facing this way, towards the tabernacle, towards Jesus and the cross. This type of orientation of the Mass is called ad Orientum. It's Latin for towards the east. And the reason why it's towards this way is because for almost about 12 to 1300 years in the history of the church, priests used to celebrate Mass this way. And oftentimes it changed during Vatican II, but sometimes people will say, well, Father, the priest's back is facing the people. How rude. Like, he should be the other way, like, so that we can see his face and so forth. Well, the thing is, it's not a matter of whether the priest's back is facing towards the people or not, or he's trying to be rude. It's the fact that he, with the people, are all together facing one way towards our Lord. And if you notice, what happens in the east on a general, like, astronomical sort of thing? What usually rises in the east? The sun, right? So there's also another sun that rose, Jesus Christ. And so before, the churches used to be built facing the east so that everybody's sight was focused on the Lord. And especially during Advent and Lent, Advent especially when we're looking forward to the coming of Jesus Christ, churches used to celebrate Mass this way so as to have everybody facing the same way to point to it. To kind of use a pop culture reference in a way, and because I'm also an absolute nerd, I love Lord of the Rings. And so there was a battle in Helm's Deep when Gandalf and Gimli and all that stuff are just surrounded by their enemies, and there's almost no hope. And then afterwards they say, Gandalf was about to leave, and he said, remember, by the next morning, look towards the east, and there you will find hope. And sure enough, when that time came, he came back. He came back with the loads of armies, and because of that, they were able to overcome their enemies. And so that's why, in a way, we have that symbolism in our culture, because it's facing towards the east, it's offering to God, and the fact that when you listen to the prayers in the Mass, there will be some prayers directed to God the Father, where the priest is saying, God, our Heavenly Father, let us pray to him, and there will be some parts when he will turn around and address it to the people. Another thing, too, is a lot of people say, well, Father, you're not a Vatican II priest. Like, Vatican II got rid of all these different things. And the fact is, my doctorate, please, God, no, I don't want to go for a doctorate. But my master's was in Vatican II documents, and I scoured the Vatican II documents, and never once did it ask us to go ahead and change the orientation of the Mass. In fact, when you look at the Missal, it said at some parts of the prayers, the priest, extending his hands, turns towards the people and says, why would it say that I would have to turn towards the people if I was already facing them the whole way? Now, so that didn't get rid of it. So it wasn't Vatican II that did it, but it was actually the Conference of Bishops afterwards in different parts of the countries that said, you know what, Protestants don't really celebrate this way, so let's go ahead and maybe go to that and enrich that symbolism. But I'm not bagging on Vatican II either, because there is a symbolism of the priest facing this way as well. Because the priest is facing this way and the people are facing me, who is at the center? Jesus, right? So we are surrounding and Jesus at the center of our lives. So that's also the significance of celebrating him. Another thing, I talked about the vestments of the priest, but you will notice that there is a chalice and it's here veiled. Now the symbolism of that is because Christ is the king and he's clothed in usually very, very royal garments, and this will match the color of the day. But the chalice remains veiled because we veil holy things. So for all those women that wear veils, in a way, what you're doing is the tabernacle is usually veiled, the chalice is usually veiled, and the women who come into the church are usually veiled, not because it's some oppressive thing like let's put women down, but it's more because we recognize that women are so holy and dignified, especially since they are given a great privilege of holding within their bodies another life and being co-creators with God. And so they are often veiled as a beautiful expression of that and the authority of God and his presence here. So we veil things that are holy, so this is veiled. But then, if you notice, when is this stripped? It's like Jesus. Jesus comes in on Palm Sunday. He's in royal clothes. He's on the donkey. Then when it comes to the part where the sacrifice is taking place, where he will be lifted up on the altar, all his clothes are stripped open. And he is bare, because this is where Jesus will be. The chalice that I'm using today is actually a chalice that was given to me by my pastor just recently. I've known him for a long time, and he's been a priest now for 55 years. This was the first chalice that he celebrated Mass as a priest 55 years ago, and he gave it to me as a gift in order to do that. At first, it was like, okay, this chalice was probably made in 1960s or 70s, and I thought, oh, this is kind of like a 1960s, 70s style chalice. But then I didn't realize that actually this is a replica of a Byzantine chalice that was used in the 600s. That it went back to that. It's sterling silver. It's probably cost about $5,000. And it goes back to that history. So all the time I thought, oh my gosh, this is just like a 60s chalice. But it's not. It's actually a replica from a chalice that they used in the Byzantine church in the 500s or 600s AD. And then another thing is when we come up and we process, I'm trying to get most of it during the way so that I don't really interrupt when the Mass starts. But when we come up, what is the first thing that the priest normally does? Genuflect, right? On which knee? See if you guys are paying attention. Right or left? How many say right? Raise your hand. How many say left? Okay, good. You guys were paying attention. It was on the right knee, right? Because when what does the getting on genuflecting on the knee symbolizes? Well, when you come in and you come into your pews, you are called to genuflect towards what? The tabernacle, right? On your right knee. And the reason is because even if you look at the secular culture, when a man proposes to a woman and he gets down on his knee, what is he saying basically to her? Well, hopefully not worship, but because we only worship God, but that I have great love for you, right? I'm going to commit my life. I'm pledging my life for you. And so in the same way, when we get down on our knee, what we're basically saying to Jesus is in the tabernacle, I am getting down on my knee. I'm pledging my life to you and professing my life to you. The thing is, for God and for the divinity, and we always go down on our right knee. So guys, take note, years later when you're proposing to your future wife, don't go down on your right knee. For human beings, you go down on your left knee. So even if the queen would come in right, very supposed to speak, knee is only for God, and left knee is for human beings, and to the one that you love, that you go down on your left knee. And then after I genuflect, I go ahead and go up, and what do? No, I'm sniffing it just to make sure that the linens are all clean, right? So. Yeah, I know, that's an old joke from my last teaching Mass. But anyway, yes, I'm kissing the altar because at that time, and even today, there is a relic that's placed in the altar, and it's usually placed at every church and every Mass where the altar is consecrated. I just went to St. Gabriel's recently where Bishop Olmsted consecrated it, and there was something called an altar stone that was placed in with the relic of St. Francis Xavier. And the reason why we put relics in our altars is because it comes back from the history of Rome, where when the church was being persecuted, the Christians were sent underground into the catacombs, and they used to celebrate Mass over the tombs, the catacombs of the tombs of the martyrs and the saints. And so when they, later on in 300s, when Constantine said it's okay now for Christianity to be brought to the surface, then they carried the practice of always remembering the heroes of the faith that witnessed to them, and so that when they venerated and kissed the relic on the altar, they were trying to say, look, this is where I'm going, this is where I'm headed. I'm meant to become a saint. And so that's the practice of why we started doing that. And now, as promised, we will start Mass. So, as you will, can you all please rise? And as I said, you can go ahead and process. Go ahead and... The procession is from earth